Listed in the best lawyers in America. Bill Eigner is one of California's top mergers and acquisitions and financing attorney, based in the San Diego office of Procopio, one of California's largest law firms, with offices in Irvine, Del Mar, San Diego, and Las Vegas, Scottsdale, and Washington, D.C. Eigner is often called the go-to guy for M&A and emerging companies. He is also an authority on forming, utilizing, showcasing, and providing compensation for boards of advisors. He is on the board of advisors for Cross Oceans Ventures Fund, Athletiverse, Sokyahealth, Acenda and Greenbutts LLC. He is a trustee emeritus of the San Diego Police Foundation and began his career as a U.S. Supreme Court Judicial Intern. Eigner is partner of Procopio and graduate of Stanford University and the University of Virginia School of Law. With that, Bill, welcome.
Thank you, Don. And again, thank you to Joyce for setting this up. Don, I appreciate the invitation and it's good to see you again. I'm Bill Eigner. I'm really glad to be here. I'm going to be speaking mostly on boards of advisors. The slide presentation refers to directors as well, but it's really going to be about board of advisors. The difference between a board of advisors and a board of directors is that the advisors don't have that many requirements. They don't have fiduciary duties. In my 20 plus years of practicing law, we've had directors get sued from time to time, especially with public companies, but I've never had an advisor sued for work as an advisor by a stockholder. So there's a lot less liability, and so it's more attractive for folks who are members of FANG. If you get recruited to serve on a board of advisors, you don't necessarily have to have D&O insurance like you would if you went on as a director. What we're trying to do with a board of advisors is make your small company look big and connect you to other people and make you more powerful. And that enables you to get the credibility, contacts, counseling, and cash, the 4 C's. That's what this is all about. And a lot of times I'm known in my circles for being somebody who can find people money. That's what people, they say, Bill, you know everybody, find me some money for my company. And my answer is, I can't really find you the money, but what I can do is make you attractive so that you'll be able to find it, or that the people you already know will be more interested in you. And so basically what we're trying to do is create a halo effect for these founders. Some of them don't have experience. And so we're trying to get them the credibility, contacts, counseling, and cash. And that enables them to raise the money. So you need to say who you are, and that's what gives you the credibility. If you're a first timer, you don't have the experience. So you need to create the aura of being experienced. So if I wanted to become the best leader possible, and I'm telling everyone I'm a leader, I'd like to surround myself with the people on Mount Rushmore. And so what we're trying to do is create a Mount Rushmore for your business, a Mount Rushmore for your particular sector. So it might be computer chips, it might be somewhere in biotech, it might be some area, but you want to get the best people you can to be serving with you, and your face goes right there with them, and you create this aura. Let me give you an example of situation here where a company had no credibility. I had a client that they were doing franchising for IT, basically IT outsourcing. And they'd go to, they were Qualcomm guys. They were really smart. They thought they were the world beater of all time. They thought they had the best idea in the world. They'd go to franchise shows, and would-be franchisees would come up to their booth and say, "What franchising experience do you have?" And they'd go, "Well, no, we're not. Well, and they just couldn't answer the question. And the important thing here is you never need to have any questions at all about your core competency for what you're doing. So I recruited a guy named Dan LaMarche. Dan LaMarche was on Mailboxes Etc's board when mailboxes went public and when they were sold to UPS Store. And then we recruited some two others from UPS Store. Their person in charge of developing franchises internationally, and their VP for franchise development in the US. And so we had those three on the board of advisors and listed them prominently with their permission. And guess how many questions our client got after that about their franchising experience? 0. You don't want any questions whatsoever about your company's competence. It's okay if they ask, what is your strategy? What kind of contracts do you have? What are you doing? But you don't want, if I start out with people asking me, did I get a law degree? The chances of me landing a client are pretty slim. I have to establish my credibility to begin with. And I do it through a firm, through Don's kind introduction, that way. So the same thing holds for the people that you work with. They need to establish credibility to interest investors and everyone else. Even recruiting, they need to establish credibility. So credibility is really important. And if you can't afford the talent to make them part of your executive team, you need to rent the talent. And that's what a board of advisors is all about. And it's not expensive. It's not expensive from the legal standpoint. It's not expensive to operate and recruit the people. So a board of advisors can provide the context that you need, whether it's customers, financiers, suppliers, you name it, and especially executives. So a lot of times you'll have a founder who needs to hire a CEO. If that founder goes straight out and tries to hire a CEO, that CEO is probably going to say no. Or maybe the CEO will say, yeah, I'll do it for 40% of the company, or something outrageous, because the CEO is taking a huge risk. On the other hand, if you're the founder and you brought on a board of advisors of experts in the field and they helped you interview the CEO candidate, then in that case, the CEO might settle for 10%. So it really pays to bring on this board of advisors early. And the cost is not that much, as we'll discuss a little later. And then counseling. And this is where all of you should consider becoming advisors. Even if you're working full-time with one company, usually you can get permission to be an advisor for another, as long as it's not competitive. And so basically, just by telling people what not to do, that's an important contribution to their company, because small companies only have so many times that they can make a mistake, and then they're out of business. And then you basically, this all leads to cash, because by the way, how many of you who are watching today are raising cash for your company right now? I'm trying to, okay, I see James. Tom, were you raising your hand? Okay, let me see who else. Anybody else? Okay. Oh, Larry, okay. So yeah, and how many of you are trying to hire people right now? This is kind of a good, okay, James. And okay, and if you're, and how many of you are trying to get more in sales or partnerships? Okay. Almost everybody needs that. And so a board of advisors can help you with these tasks that are important to you. And now, one thing, I don't know how many of you have ever taken a summer lifeguarding course, or I guess you grew up in California, or some of you, I grew up in Ohio, so it was only the summer, but I remember taking a life-saving course. And what I learned is that a person who's drowning will often try to drown the person saving them, because they're so desperate and they grab on to people and take them down with them. And that was one of the scariest things, because this big counselor at this camp grabbed a hold of me during the training, and I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I just had to fight my way out of it to save him. And that's what advisors feel like. They feel like drowning people are trying to grab onto them. And you guys have been in that situation where the entrepreneur is not content with just advice. They want cash, they want introductions, they want to pump you dry. So if you're the entrepreneur, you've got to play it cool. And that's really, really hard for them. But if you do your job right as an entrepreneur building a board of advisors, then you don't have to ask your advisors for cash. They will want to invest. So we want to select different directors and advisors for different roles. So for example, let's say that you're trying to sell into Qualcomm. Then you might want an advisor who recently was at Qualcomm, who left in a good situation, who's still well connected to them and can give you the credibility to sell to Qualcomm. On the other hand, you have to be careful that it's not somebody who is at Broadcom or some rival of Qualcomm. So you have to be real strategic about how you showcase and how you recruit for your board of advisors. Some people are just going to be marquee type people. They'll be listed as advisors and they'll hardly ever return your calls, but they're so valuable that it's really worth it. And then others, you really need them on a day-to-day basis. And so, but you have to just kind of hold off from overdoing it. And also, by the way, I've written an article for all of you that we can send later on how to avoid getting used and abused as an advisor, because the FANG group, you guys are valuable advisors to a lot of companies. So I usually give this talk to companies looking to form boards of advisors, but this is very applicable to all of you as advisors yourselves. So it's a little bit different viewpoint, but I tried to meld the viewpoints in this talk. So the ideal board members, by the way, you all have, you're going to have these materials, so you'll be able to see this. So some of these I'll just go through it. But for the ideal board member is somebody who has raised money, made money for investors in a similar industry to yours, sold the company to someone that you hope to sell your company to, and has good ties to that company that might buy from your company or invest in your company or buy your company. So that's the ideal person. You may not find her or him. You might have to get 2 or 3 people to satisfy those qualifications. But you're basically trying to de-risk the company for your investors, and for executives you're recruiting, for partners, and for customers. So I mean, think if you were trying to sell to Broadcom and you were able to say, hey, basically the first person to call Broadcom would be someone who sold a company to Broadcom. They know that person. He worked there for 2 or 3 years, helping them acquire other companies. And now he's on your board of advisors. If that's the first person calling Broadcom about you, think how much more effective that would be than if you as the founder called Broadcom. It's a whole difference. It's basically an insider telling them, hey Joe, this company I'm on the board of advisors for, they remind me of my company when I sold to you guys, and only they're further along in this area, and I really like what they're doing. I think they have a few challenges, but they're going to do this and this. So they basically have instant credibility with the buyer of your company or a customer of your company. It really makes a huge difference. You're already on the inside versus just trying to figure out who you're supposed to talk to. Instead, you already have the right person. There are people out there who can get you meetings, like a first meeting, but you want someone who can get the second meeting and the third meeting, and also be able to follow up and find out what happened on the inside of that other company from the first and second meeting. So that's where you're trying to get when you're recruiting a board of advisors. Now, keep in mind that there are now you guys are actually excellent advisors and can be really helpful. The financial side of things is really important, and the companies are underserved. The company's lawyer can be a great connection. LinkedIn can be great. I don't believe in just cold calling or sending an email to someone I don't know and inviting them to be on a board of advisors. So it's always best to go through someone who knows them. And these are just some board resources. And before you recruit someone, it's good to really make sure you know them or know a lot about them. Really check them out. This is something I don't always practice what I preach. A lot of times if I know someone well, I don't do the database searches, but it's a really good idea to do so. A lot of times like Don Nesbitt might recommend somebody, but he might say to Dave, hey, I don't know these people very well. You need to check him out. But Dave, in his mind, he's a fair-minded guy with a good memory, but he's gonna, over time, it's gonna be, this is Don's guy. So Don referred this guy to me. Now Don said, I don't know this guy, you better check him out. But Dave is thinking, this is Don's guy, and if the guy turns out to be bad, it reflects badly on Don. So you got to be careful with these kind of referrals and for these companies. So if you get the wrong advisor, it can really irk people. Like for instance, you're trying to sell to Amazon, and somebody you have was a prominent Microsoft person, and Amazon and Microsoft don't always get along, and it might hurt your credibility with them. So you have to just think about who you're recruiting and why, and then make sure they're the right person. And basically, when you're checking out a person, a good person doesn't mind being asked, and a bad person, you shouldn't care what he thinks. That's my view, at least. Easier said than done sometimes. Some people get offended, but I think you just, they have to respect that you're trying to protect your reputation and the company. So if Don referred someone and he made sure to just ask me for more references before he referred me to Dave, then that's the way it has to be. So now keep in mind that a company's needs change as it matures and different things happen. Like today, we might be trying to sell to Allergan. And then tomorrow we might be trying to sell to another company. And so we might change advisors accordingly. So right now, somebody might be a great advisor for what we're trying to do. And then we abandon a line of business and that person is no longer useful. So what I like to do is use invite someone onto a term. So for example, if I were to say, Tom, I would like you to be on Eigner Corporation's Board of Advisors for 2023. So up until about October or November, I would just say for that calendar year. And that way, if Tom blows me off, never returns my calls, and so forth, but I don't want to irk him and have a complete break with him. I can just say at the end of the year, thanks for serving on Eigner Corporation Board of Advisors, Tom. Here's a Ruth's Chris gift certificate and a plaque that says Eigner Corp, thanks for your service. And then that's what we call plaque and sack. So basically you finish your term. If someone is valuable to you, if someone is really bad and you just don't want to deal with them, then you set up your Board of Advisors agreement so that they can be terminated immediately without cause. But at the minimum, you want a term limit. So I usually invite people on for a 2-year term, but I have their options vest monthly, and I have them vest over 2 years. Actually, I'm sorry, let me say that again. I invite them for a 1-year term for the calendar year, but I give them options vesting over 2 years. And then so they need to do a good job if they want to vest in all of their options. They need to be basically reappointed. So I think all of you are familiar with how equity incentive plans or option plans work. But I like to, depends on the type of company, and there are a lot of these things. Whenever we're talking about a rule of thumb, the rule of thumb is variable, and that depends on the circumstances. But often we'll reserve 10 to 15% of the outstanding shares for an equity incentive plan. And we'll appoint the advisors for a defined term. And then there are certain rules of thumb for issuing options. Now, if you're starting a company with Bill Gates, you might be able to get away with issuing very small amount of options. If you're starting it yourself and you're barely more than a PowerPoint and you don't have experience in the field, you may have to give away more. So, and the amounts of options that you give away do not have to be uniform. So Bill might command one thing, James might be another, Han might be another, and you don't necessarily have to give them all the same thing. And if Han brings in a customer that I'm really happy with, I give Han more options, or I vest her options, and just accelerate the vesting. If James if James does a bad job, I might terminate him, or I might just plaque and sack at the end of the term. But even then, James would still be a supporter of the company because he would still have options. And we'll talk about that in a second. But right now, the rules of thumb for issuing options for usually an advisor would get 0.25%. That's about the standard. But there's not really a standard because it depends on how far along you are. And now you guys are sophisticated enough to know when you're talking 0.25%, the question is, what's the denominator? A quarter percent of what? And this is, it's really something I urge entrepreneurs to avoid talking about. What I like them to do is just issue numbers of option shares. So and I'd like to use the Italian lira method, because I know that Han or James would rather get 10,000 options rather than 10 options, even if it's the same percentage of the company. It's just the way we all are. And it's easier to slice and dice with the bigger numbers, and people feel better about it. But it's important to just keep in mind what people want and need. And usually I have the options vest monthly over the term, usually 2 years with no cliff. So if you're hiring employees, that's a different situation. With employees, the typical thing is 4 years with a 1-year cliff. The cliff means that you have to be there the whole period before you vest in the first part of your options. So if you were issued 100 shares for the first 25, if you had a 1-year cliff, you wouldn't vest in the first 25 until after a year. Now, that's not fair to an advisor, because advisors usually aren't paid in cash. So if you're not getting paid in cash and you're only getting options, then, and you work 9 months, you're being ripped off if you're terminated as an advisor. And now all of a sudden, you're basically have no options whatsoever. And I also suggest that vesting should accelerate upon change of control, because when a company's getting bought, the buyer's not buying the advisors usually. But here's another thing, and this actually is helpful to you folks as advisors. The post-termination option exercise period should be long. So typically with employees, if you leave as an employee, you have 30 to 90 days to exercise your options. If you're an advisor and you get 30 to 90 days to exercise your options, you don't know how that company's going to do. A lot of these companies are pre-revenue, or at least they're pre-exit. So you have no idea if it's worthwhile for you to write a check to this company. And so you might walk away. Again, there you are, used and abused. You've basically worked for free. So I counsel companies to have a long post-termination option exercise period, even 7 years, because it takes a long time for a company to get sold or go public. Now, when you recruit, I just wanted to, like, people ask me, well, what about having board of advisors meetings? Should I have meetings? Well, remember, we're talking about advisors as potential investors. So if you do your job right, they'll want to invest, but you can do your job wrong. And one wrong way, in my opinion, and I'm sure some of you have different views, but in my opinion, it's a bad idea to have all your advisors in a meeting. I like to meet with them one by one. Why? Because when there is a group of people together, particularly men, I have to admit to being the same type. The way you show your intelligence in a group involving a business is by finding a problem. So I might want to say, hey, James, hey, Han, do you notice this? They need their sales, blah, 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 aren't doing this. And so I've exposed a problem, and James and Han are thinking, I'm not going to invest in this company any more than I already have. I'm going to put in my time, but no money. So you, as a founder of a company, inviting boards of advisors, members to come, you don't want them all at the same time. Let me give an example. Same thing with fundraising. I had a client that was raising money for a telecom company, and he lived in Rancho Santa Fe and had a brunch at the inn at Rancho Santa Fe. Invited all his neighbors and friends and contacts, and there were about 30 people there. And they were all high net worth, really the type of people who could invest $250,000 or more in a company. And he was counting on this. He invited them there, gave sort of a talk, was serving champagne and mimosas and all this stuff. And then question and answer period came, and his next door neighbor, who was a friend of his, said, you know, I've been at AT&T for 10 years. AT&T will never go for this. So everybody else just, oh, and they put down their champagne, put down their mimosas, and just thanked the host and left. Basically, zilch, nada, no investment from that meeting. So that's why I don't like to have group meetings. That's just, that just killed it. It was just heartbreaking for this guy. This was one of his good friends, but the guy just, for some reason, was having an out-of-body experience, or he just wanted to show how smart he was or whatever, but it's just not the right thing to do for most companies. And the other reason why I don't like to have a group meeting with advisors is that advisors would rather talk than listen usually. And so, I mean, all of you and me, I mean, we're willing to listen to people, but we want to make sure that we can be heard too. And so if you have a big group of people and you get one word edgewise, that's not really satisfying for you. And it's not as valuable to the company. So one by one. Also, I advise it's based on the founder as to how many people she can deal with. So if the founder can deal with 3 people, keep it at 3. If the founder can deal with 10 people, deal with 10. Keep in mind that at one point or another, different advisors will be needed for different things. So, and then it's a good idea to keep them informed, kind of like you would keep informed investors. You try to find some way to make it scalable for yourself to send out something, but you don't want some chat going on the same way as the Inn at Rancho Santa Fe. I still think of that as the Inn at Rancho Santa Fe massacre. But anyway, so if you do recruit a board of advisors, there's no sense in keeping it secret. So you should have press releases, include photos. So, for example, if I'm doing a board of advisors, I had Randy Weaver on my board of advisors, I would put Randy's picture in, and I would and send it to Randy's alumni publications and everything else. And then Randy, everyone's going to start saying, Randy, how's this company? How's Eigner Corporation working out? And Randy might not know at the time. He might be on the board of advisors, but not really participate that much. But he might call me and say, Bill, what's going on here? Like, all these people are asking me about this. And he'll start caring more, and he'll realize that if he has to tell people later, Eigner Corporation just crashed and burned, it kind of reflects badly on him. So he'll want to be more involved and help because his name's affiliated with it. And same with Larry and others and Carla. Basically, you just want to make sure that if your name is affiliated with something, you're proud of it and you want to make it something worthy of being proud. But sometimes, but at the same time, if you're on the company side, and I make my board of advisor agreements reflect this, the advisor should never be used in a way that they don't consent to. So, for example, if I list Larry in my offering materials and Larry's not comfortable with how I'm doing that, he needs to be able to stop me, or even better, just veto my use of his name in that particular situation, or else list him in a more neutral way. Because it can be very effective as a company raising money to feature your board of advisors. Let me give you an example. And this is sometimes it's done poorly, but it's effective. It was during one of the previous recessions, and there was a fund launching, a venture fund launching, and they recruited one of my clients who was a founder of Qualcomm, and they made this fellow chairman of their board of advisors, and I negotiated the agreement with them, but they really just went well beyond making him, just listing him a little bit. And before long, everyone thought this was his fund. And it was during a recession, so it really helped. Fortunately, the fund was successful and they raised a lot of money, but in the minds of the investors, this was not X's, X wasn't just an advisor, this was X's fund. And so that's what happens in a good way and a bad way. The good way for the company is that this person created a halo effect for the whole company. And people thought, well, if he's involved, it must be good. But on the other hand, from his standpoint, if this company hadn't been good, it could have tarnished his reputation. So you need to, if you're an advisor, you need to have veto power over how a company uses you. On the company side, you want people who will cooperate up to a point. So if someone says, if basically we have Mark saying, you guys can't use me at all, I don't even want to be listed, then you have to give some thought to, like, do we want Mark on the board? Or Brian says something like that. We basically say, Brian, we'll put you on our website. We won't put you in the offering materials. Is that okay? And he says, yes, something like that. So you have to be careful the way you do these things. But at the same time, a board of advisors usually isn't that helpful if they're not being publicized. And a lot of times people will say, hey, there's this guy, Brian Arnold. He's a great guy. I want to put him on my board of directors. And I'm saying, well, that's great, but how long have you known Brian? Well, I don't know him real well. Even if Brian is the best, unless he's investing $5 million or something in the company, I would suggest that you put him on the board of advisors first and try him out. Make sure that you two get along, and don't put anybody on your board of directors until you know them, unless you don't have the choice. Like sometimes a VC will invest and you have to put their person on the board, but otherwise you don't want to do that. And you should just keep in mind that directors eventually can hire and fire the CEO and CFO. So you want to test them out before electing them to the board. And with directors, I suggest again that you try them out and also bring them on for the same 1-year term or calendar year term. So you basically say, hey, Lawrence, you can be on my board of advisors for 2023. And then at the end of 2023, if it's not working out, you basically, thank him, send him a Ruth's Chris gift certificate and a plaque and move on. But in the meantime, Lawrence still is an optionee of the company. His options stopped vesting, but he already got a lot of options. And so he has an interest in helping the company. And he certainly doesn't want to badmouth the company at that point. He'll just tell his friends, hey, yeah, I was on the company and I served my term. It's not like no one really gets fired unless you're really bad.